So thank you, Anne, and thank you to the professors, graduate students, undergraduate students, staff, and administrators who have made these teach-in sessions a highlight of a very difficult fall semester. Beyond the Teach-In Collective, there are scores of diversity workers across this campus, in the provost and president's office, in the Office of Community Engagement, in the Gender and Multicultural Centers, in committees at the university level, and within our academic schools and classrooms. I'm especially grateful for the Equity Task Force in Arts and Humanities, which brings together faculty, staff, and administrators to tackle policy and community concerns about diversity and discrimination. So to Sabrina Starneman and Alice Presti, my co-chairs in that effort. Diversity work is happening all over UTD. In broad initiatives like those we've seen from the Black Student Body, the McDermott Scholars Equity Committee, the Black Faculty and Staff Alliance, our employee resource groups, and the Living Our Values Task Force, and often in ways we can't see, like contentious discussions about salary equity in the Faculty Senate or diverse faculty in our academic programs. Diversity work is necessary and it's hard. As much as we know this university is committed to diversity, institutional change comes only in the wake of hard and persistent work. Papers, research, proposals, sweat, blood, and tears. Feminist scholar Sarah Ahmed notes that diversity workers often encounter resistance, and for that reason, diversity work is work. Labor, both paid, for example, in my case, paid, in the case of student activists, for example. She thinks of diversity workers as, quote, institutional plumbers. They have to work out where the blockage is or what stops something, for example, a new policy, from moving through the system. Moreover, according to a recent in Inside Higher Ed, most of the diversity work that happens in institutions of higher learning is the result of consistent labor by non-white, non-male, and first-generation scholars. So today, we take time to focus on diversity workers and hear directly from them about their experiences, the challenges they face, and the hopes they have for this institution and beyond. We know there are more of you out there. We see you, and we thank you for your work. Very soon, I will pass the mic to Dr. Kimberly Berdine, who will be moderating this panel. But before I do, I also want to thank Cynthia Sorto, who will be behind the scenes monitoring our chat. Cynthia Sorto serves as Assistant Director in the Department of Community Engagement in the Office of Diversity and Community Engagement at UT Dallas, and she manages the Diversity Scholars Program and the Young Wise Investigators Program. Thank you, Cynthia. Dr. Kimberly Berdine, our moderator, is a licensed psychologist who serves as Assistant Director and Training Director at the University of Texas at Dallas Student Counseling Center. Thank you, Dr. Berdine. She will moderate this discussion with Bruce August Jr., who's Assistant Director of Experiential Programs in the University. I'm sorry, Assistant Director of Programming and Marketing for the Multicultural Center at UT Dallas. Also joining us is Brianna Hobbs, Assistant Director of Experiential Programs in the University Career Center and President of the Black Faculty and Staff Alliance Employee Resource Group. Dr. Poe Johnson earned his PhD from the School of Arts and Humanities and is now Assistant Teaching Professor of Media and Communications at Drew University. And Jacqueline Prince is Assistant Director of Women's and Gender Equity Programs in the Gender Center at UTD. I'm so grateful for all of you for joining us and being part of this conversation. And Dr. Berdine, I hand the mic to you and thank you so much.
Thank you for setting the stage, and I hope the panelists felt some good energy from that as well, just laying the foundation for what it means to be engaging in this work. And I really resonated with that, with the plumbing analogy around the work, because it can be kind of gritty in that way, and just speaking to the skill, right, and the of folks who do that work. So I'm really excited to let you all hear from this wonderful panel and this wonderful group of folks that you'll get to be in community with. Of course, we want to co-create a space and co-create some learning. So please feel free to engage in the chat. I already just shouted out and really appreciate the support that's going out around making sure that our time and our words are accessible, and hopefully we can continue to work through some things. So thank you so much, because it's in those kind of ways that you all are helping us co-create the space. So what I will do is we have some questions that I'll share with the panelists, and I'll also probably throw in some commentary, because I certainly identify as a person who is engaging in or attempts to engage in equity work. So as a way to kick us off and sort of allow our panelists to kind of introduce themselves and more maybe in ways that give us a little bit more insight into who they are and what they do on the campuses that they represent, I would love for folks to talk a little bit about the equity, diversity, social justice, and inclusion work that you do, and maybe in ways that might feel a little bit different than just kind of naming your title, because sometimes our title gives us information, other times maybe not as much. So what would you like to share out about what stands out maybe this week or today or recently, that tells us a little bit about what you do? So however you all respond to that, or however you're making meaning of that, would love to hear from folks. And so why don't we start with Jacqueline?
I'm always ready to jump in, you know. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this conversation. As Kim shared, my name is Jacqueline Prince. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I work for the Gender Center. So part of how I like to describe that work to others is in really three areas. So the way that we kind of frame it is through education, advocacy, and programming. So the education for us looks like different mini workshops that we hold for offices, student groups, things like that, around anywhere from LGBT plus 101 to a conversation about the gender pay gap. We also have our culture of equity training, which you might see my little emblem there, which is a gender equity focused training series. We also have Safe Zone Ally training as a series, which is focused towards LGBT plus equity. We also do more informal consultation. This is probably where, Dr. Berdine had referenced, what feels salient for this week or today, or even what I would say education-wise, I see from day to day, meeting to meeting even, is I'll get calls sometimes from folks who are really just hoping to talk through an issue that came up, or a word that they're unsure of, or how can I phrase this differently to someone I'm supervising, or in my classroom, this came up and I really struggled with it. And so those are probably some of my favorite conversations to have with folks, but I would say that that's all really encapsulated in the education work that we do. Some of the advocacy work that we do is really pouring into consulting on policies around campus. So for those that may be unaware, we do have lactation spaces that exist. And so for lactating individuals who are navigating the UTD campus, knowing where they're at, knowing how they function, but also really trying to educate maybe their supervisors or professors on access to those facilities feels really important. So that's just one example of some of the advocacy work that we do. And then lastly, programming. So we host different types of programming throughout the year, some that are focused on celebrations of different identities and different communities, but some that are unfortunately take more of a memorial tone. I'm thinking specifically of a more kind of on the fly event that we had after the recent unfortunate murder of one of our community members that happened. And so we held a Netflix watch party where we watched Disclosure, which is a phenomenal, I guess I didn't envision myself giving like a Netflix plug right now, but it's truly an amazing documentary put together by trans and non-binary folks doing a lot of reflection and education on the community. And so that's what we came together to do, to not only build community, but also honor the life that was taken. So those are just some examples of how I would describe the work that we do in the Gender Center and the work that I get to do, all the way from education, advocacy, and programming on a daily basis, but also what kind of happens for us annually.
All of the things which you can hear. And one of the things that I noticed in the way that Jacqueline spoke about the work specifically, or the way that Jacqueline spoke about the work that you're doing, is how much it feels like a collective, because you talked about we do this and this is what we do. And I also know that a lot of that is what you do, right? And what you lead the Gender Center in doing. And we might come back to that, because I'm curious about like that and how that might, connect to some of, kind of what this work looks like. But shout outs to you and the we that was in there as well, in terms of all that you're doing. Let's hear from Brianna. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing and anything that kind of stands out that gives us some insight into your world and some of the work, the equity and diversity work that you're doing.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Brianna Hobbs. I am the Assistant Director of Experiential Programs in the University Career Center, and I also serve as the President of the Black Faculty and Staff Alliance. And so this year, employee resource groups have been on the move. And so we have really worked hard to come together and put forth some of our ideas and some of our concerns to the administrations in our call to action document. After the murder of George Floyd, we felt it was especially important, and really, truthfully, hearing from some of the students really kind of pushed us to go ahead and do some of the work also. But it was important for the administration to know what is going on from a Black staff member, Black faculty, what we experience on a daily basis at UT Dallas. I still feel that we have a long way to go, and we have a lot of work to do. But I think that it's important that they hear from the people and that they understand that Black stories matter. And if someone says they experienced something, believing it as true, that they did experience it, and then what can we do to make it better? And so we are still in ongoing conversations with the administration, and they have been open to hearing what some of our current concerns are and addressing some of the things in the call to action document. We do partner very, very closely with the LOV task force. And so several of our members are on that particular task force. And so we're kind of trying to hit it at all angles. But I am so grateful to have a great group of people on the oversight committee. So the BFSA formed an oversight committee to handle these issues specifically and to create the call to action document. And so it's made up of 12 members, and I want to thank each and every single one of them, because every time I'm presenting, I have to, I might be the face for some of these things as being the president, but the work that all of these people are doing is so important. And so there's some behind the scenes folks that definitely need to get the appreciation that they deserve. And so, but we are going to keep pushing through. And my hope in the long run is that we actually have real change at UT Dallas. And so, for the time that I'm here, for the time that I'm not here, and for any Black faculty and staff that come in after us, the work needs to be done. And so I'm kind of at a place where I'm hearing, UTD is a young campus. We might not be ready for that. And I believe that we are. And so we need to be the ones that are stepping forward and making those changes. And not just for ourselves as people who work here, but for our students, because we can't feed into them if we're all the way empty and drained at the end of the day. And so I'm hoping that the university continues to make some changes and that they understand the importance of this type of work and that it's needed, it's necessary, it's important, it's valued. And yeah, that's me.
Okay, and I'm also going to try really hard not to like comment on everything that everybody is sharing, but I appreciate all of the nuggets that were in what you shared around the importance of believing people, the importance of taking care of ourselves in this work, which we're going to talk about and kind of tap into. But I think that those are things that are so important, and also being kind of student-led and student-centered, I think is certainly the way that I sustain myself in the work that I do. So thank you so much. And yes, kudos to the BFSA and the folks who are serving specifically in that capacity, making the campus safer and more inclusive. All right, okay. Let's go with Bruce. What are you up to? How can we know a little bit more about your world and in the work that you're doing?
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Shout out to Brianna. You're doing a great job. I know I was the first president, but you're the best president of the BFSA. So keep up the great work. As assistant director of the Multicultural Center of Programming and Marketing, I get a chance to really touch a lot of the different pieces we do at the MC. And I want to shout out our staff and fearless leader and Office of Diversity Community Engagement. Without them, we wouldn't be. And so I think that at the end of the day, I get a chance to lead some things, but ultimately it's empowering our staff and students that allow us to be effective on our campus. So at the Multicultural Center, just to kind of give you a bird's eye view, we get a chance to focus on 3 areas of focus and making sure we're student-centered and diversity-driven. The first being our cultural celebration. So we provide events and programs that create community and celebrate the different cultures and communities of students, staff, and faculty that work, live, and play at UT Dallas. Ultimately, we want to create a welcoming space and celebrate the different milestones in those cultural communities. Two, we provide diversity education. So we provide workshops, trainings, teachings, consulting, advocacy for our student staff, mainly our students. We have some staff things in the works, but our students, making sure that they are being culturally competent, as our vision is to make sure they are culturally competent to be able to go work in a global workforce. And last but not least, our student success and outreach. And so we focus on our underrepresented minority students and making sure that they have the support and programming and mainly support, I'll say that, they need to be successful at UT Dallas. The Multicultural Center was founded in 2003, so we're a teenager, we're 17, we're learning, we're growing, and we're moving into the next phase of our development. So what I can say is that we're a multi-pronged approach to support students at UT Dallas. We actually have a physical center on campus where we hopefully get back to the campus socially distant, be it, we will be able to resume our home away from home for our all of our students. It's not just our students of color or that claim to be students of color. All students are welcome there, as well as faculty and staff. So feel free to check out our website to learn more. Me personally, I'm an alumni of UT Dallas. So I believe in our institution. I believe that we can grow and change and we can meet the needs of our community. So that's just a little bit about me.
Yes, and shout out to Cynthia, who is also dropping the information for everyone. So it's nice to have, in case people want to learn a little bit more, because I think that can certainly be some of the misconception, right? That like the equity and inclusion work is kind of only for the folks who hold marginalized identity. And ideally, which I know we're gonna dive into, right? That the work is really around, is for folks in our privileged identities, right? To get resources so that we can help to, make the campus more inclusive for folks. So Thank you for sharing, Bruce. And then Poe, what do you have going on? And tell us a little bit about what you do, and what would help us give us some more insight into your world?
So I come at this from somewhat of a strange place, since I'm no longer at University of Texas at Dallas, but I did receive my PhD from there. And also because when I hear the term diversity work, I somewhat bristle, right? Because it's a kind of term that is almost like if a boulder fell through your house and you're trying to fix it with like a glue stick. Like this is obviously nothing so diversity work is a kind of patchwork thing that we do. It's like, it's the things we have, also not nearly enough. Like really, we should always be talking about how to like reform and restructure these systems that are in place, redevelop them so that they are more inclusive at the fundamental level, not on the sort of surface level, which I think sometimes is the problem with diversity work, is that we are so, and it's not like it's bad work, right? This is not a knock on diversity work, because I do it and everybody in this panel does it and we all do it well, but it's also, it is not what we should be doing, right? We should be really getting into the system itself, pulling it apart and putting it back together. So what I do now is, as a professor, I teach revolution, right? I teach students how to like think in a revolutionary mindset. Now, on my sort of day-to-day teaching or like faculty level, I do more of like the diversity work, like, you know, trying to help think through syllabi or like decolonize syllabi, also just like sort of being like the black face in a sea of white people, right? That's another thing that I do, I suppose. You want to call that work? I would call it work. So yeah, most of my work sort of like, it comes like these two ways. And as a scholar, I try to like join these two ideas together to try to like piece through, so sort of give history and perspective to an ongoing kind of structural violence that's been happening since at least the founding of this nation, really before that.
Okay, I feel ready to to dive in with that. Thank you so much for talking about what we should be doing, and I think it's really important. And I hope people are buckled up and have their notebooks out, or however you however you engage with learning, because I think I learn the most, and we stand to learn the most from people who are in the work, and also engaging in scholarship and training and teaching in the work. And so I appreciate you talking about like, this is what we ought to be doing. And it seems like we're throwing out some really good analogies, and I love that. It's like we got a little glue stick with what we do, right? Which serves a purpose, right? Like we probably can patch a few things, right? But love what you talked about, and would love to be a fly on the wall in your classroom talking about revolution. I think I need some of that in my life. So I want to throw out and kind of dive into our first question, because I think it feels connected to that, and invite our panelists to kind of just share out. And maybe I should have paused. Was there anything that popped up for y'all in response to what you heard from one another before I and I'm sure there was tons, but anybody just feeling the urge to want to say something or engage in some commentary from some of what was shared?
Yeah, I'll say something real quick. Just know that you may see two of the offices here from the Office of Diversity, but we also have our Department of Community Engagement and also our institutional initiatives that are not here and represented on this panel. So the work that ODCE does it's a sum of all its parts. It's no individual leader. I think what we do as a unit helps to propel the university, and also advising other colleagues on the campus of how to move forward, how to work with diversity, how to improve its efforts, how to really assess where they are and moving forward. So I just want to acknowledge that the work is not just between these offices, but it's definitely spread out. And I don't think we have enough time in the day to really talk about every piece of it, but I do want to acknowledge them, as I see some of them in the crowd. So
yes. And it is taking everything in me, because I was like, I really want Cynthia to be an honorary panelist too. So since Bruce brought it up, Cynthia, if you wouldn't mind sharing out a little bit about the work that you do and maybe giving us some insight, particularly as you are being very resourceful and helping us out right now. What do you do? And tell us a little bit about the Office of Community Engagement that Bruce, or anything you would want us to know before we dive into the questions.
Sure. Thank you so much. Like Bruce said, we are very multifaceted, Office of Diversity and Community Engagement. And I think what's really unique about our department is that we do a lot of work within the university, but also a large portion of the work that we do is outward. It's thinking not just about the current students, but thinking about the high school students, the middle school students, even the elementary school students that we hope also eventually come to higher education. We obviously would love for them to come to UT Dallas. I specifically get to do a little bit of both. I manage the Diversity Scholars Program. And so for folks who might not know, we have about 80 scholars who get the scholarship and really get support on campus in an effort to increase the number of underrepresented students on our campus and helping them really be successful. And so this program really supports that. And also the Young Wise program, which helps create kind of like a pipeline STEM research program for girls interested in STEM who traditionally we don't see. And so also our office does a lot of college outreach and access. So anywhere from talking about what it is to go to college to filling out your FAFSA. And so we are really out there doing some of this work. And by we, I say over 20 plus student workers that work in our department. So we're 4 full-time staff and have over 20 student workers that really support this. And so in large part, a huge shout out to them because we have students on this campus that really are committed to doing this diversity work and who believe in access and equity and inclusion because many of them are first generation. Many of them had, it wasn't an easy path to get to UT Dallas. And so it's a lot of that, reaching back and ensuring that families like theirs and other students who are thinking about going to college have a similar opportunity. So we're small but mighty, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all. And I'll peek around as much as I can, but thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm like, oh, see, we got to give students another shout. So always just trusting wherever we're led in an educational space like this. So the first question I have for you all, and feel free if I don't think we all necessarily need to respond to a question, just wherever you're feeling kind of pulled. But the first question is particularly for those who have been on campus engaging in diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice work for a number of years. What are some of the foundational concepts or histories that feel important to name in this conversation in terms of the work, the diversity work and what it looks like? Jacqueline, you're given a kind of a knowing look.
I'm giving my marinating face because I'm marinating on the question, the wonderful question. I am just someone who's been on campus for a couple of years in a staff role. And so that's the lens in which I'm speaking with. But something I think that Bruce referenced before in regard to the Multicultural Center really got me thinking about like the life cycle. Bruce had referenced the Multicultural Center, being a certain number of years old, and it really got me thinking because the Gender Center was founded in 1996, and we know that at least the creation and founding and melding of the different offices of ODCE is definitely like an important historical touchstone to know. But I also think I wanted to connect it to what Cynthia was saying in her shout out to the student staff that help that office run and help many of our offices run. I also think about the student activists that were referenced in the beginning. So all of those things combined lead me to reference what I think is just such an important factor when you're talking about diversity work that hopefully turns to inclusion work, that then hopefully turns into liberation work. You know, that this is truly, I'm thinking about you, Poe, and what you put out there, and I'm trying my best to like be good and not bite too much on it, but really, like, I think about this almost as a life cycle of someone or something that is really growing and changing and adapting. So something that I've just found crucial in the work that I get to do is flexibility. So I had referenced in talking about programming that we did like a day turnaround for a program because we recognized that we wanted to recognize a need in our community. And so it was just it was just really important that we responded to that. And so much of what this this work tends to, when I think it's done relatively successfully, is when it has a copious amount of flexibility to it. So so being able to be responsive to the needs of the people that we are charged with serving. Then taking a moment to examine that effort. So looking at the program that we put on, was that actually what people needed and wanted? Was that healing? Was that restorative? You know, what kind of like positive energy did that put or infuse into our students, staff, and faculty? And seeing what things did or didn't work. So doing kind of like an evaluative process to what we offered, and then making a change. So I think that just feels so crucial to talking about like the historical arc of, yes, ODCE, but just kind of like diversity, inclusion, and justice work in general is the idea of flexibility, because we know something I see people getting kind of hung up on a lot is terminology or language. I spent probably a lot of my time talking through different word choices that people can make. It is a really big thing. How we communicate compassion to one another is essential. But I've noticed that there seems to be a lot of nervousness about how easily like language changes, and just being flexible and being as up to date as possible. That feels like such an important tenet to diversity, inclusion, and liberation work.
And I think that you know, we started off setting the frame for that this is work, and I think a part of the what makes it work is, in order to be responsive, in order to kind of shift with the liberation that we're doing collectively, you know, that flexibility is required. And I think in a large system, right, both like this institution is just, there's many people, but when you have like legacy, and then we're part of the UT system, which is connected to the legislation, which is flexibility is oftentimes kind of counter to the work, because so much of it can be, so much of what we do is oftentimes rooted in just tradition, or just, we're doing this is the way we've always done it, and now we're talking about this revolutionary kind of like, we just need to stop doing that altogether. We need to create something new, and that is difficult, right? And it's difficult just psychologically, right? Which could probably be a whole nother session if we, you know, if we took that kind of lens, but just really appreciating that notion of flexibility. And that does feel like a very important construct to hold, and gives a little bit of, you know, kind of historical context. Poe, did you unmute?
Yes.
You ready to go?
Yes, I am. So I'm going to take this from a much more sort of scholarly perspective, since that's obviously my background. So the works that the things that are foundational, the texts that have been foundational to me are things like Pronoun, Combahee River Collective, right? So Black feminist work, but mostly just work that that taught me the importance of always thinking in the sort of revolutionary mindset, while also acknowledging that there's a kind of day-to-day activity that has to go on, right? We can't sort of substitute one thing for the other thing. Both need to be there at all times. We can't just say like, oh, let's dismantle these systems tomorrow, right? Because that's obviously not realistic. But at the same time, if we don't think in those ways, we don't think in terms of dismantling systems, then we get sort of like happy with the kind of everyday, like mundane activity. And we think like this much work, like the whole, like, look how far we've come, right? Which is a kind of saying like, you should be happy about where you are and not look how far you've come. So we start to think like, look how far we've come, how just be happy to be where you are, be grateful. Then we stop thinking that maybe we start thinking we need to change. But I also want to highlight too, though, that I learned, and I've now had a sort of quite a schooling in terms of like Black intellectual thought and Black liberatory movements. But I should highlight, though, that, and part of my sort of interest in being part of this panel is that I got that, and this is not a disrespect to some of my professors, I got that on my own because it wasn't offered at UTD, right? So there was no place for me to learn that. That's a thing that I had to go out and do extra work on top of being a PhD student, on top of being a TA, on top of being president of the GSA, which I was, on top of running a conference. I had to do all of that and do all this other kind of work because UTD, at least the A&H department at the time, didn't have any kind of structural commitment to these kinds of things. Didn't have commitment to understanding anything about Black studies or Africana or studies or however, like whatever term you want to use to phrase that. It didn't have any commitment to Black professors, right? So they didn't really have a commitment to its Black students. So my position was kind of always in opposition, right? So I took that really seriously. And because I took it seriously, I was able to accomplish some things, but it's not because the university itself is there behind me like that. And I hope maybe they've changed. I'll be honest, I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical of when sort of like diversity movements happen, like, and people get interested and even have these kinds of things because they often feel like show. They don't feel like go. So I'll stop for the moment, but yeah, I could speak for many, many hours on that.
Yeah, but really important one, just kind of like cautionary things to consider with where our energy is coming from in any given moment for what can feel like some urgency, right? And if we're not careful, it can be urgency in like, let's look like we're doing this, right? As opposed to oftentimes what is a much more kind of slow, deep dive, kind of rich liberation or, kind of revolution. It is very much, it might not look like things, or you might actually expose things in ways when you're doing the work. And oftentimes that's what we're doing in terms of equity and social justice work. It can be exposing, which is a part of, I think, what makes it scary for people or threatening for people when they see equity work happening, because it's not about kind of the show that you spoke to. There was a question that came up, and I just want us to hold it, and maybe if there's anything that comes up, then maybe you can think about that. I think we're going to kind of tap into it. I won't read the entirety of it, but it was a question around like, how do we do this work, and how do we like make it a little bit more centralized, and how is it, because you don't necessarily have an equity person in every department. So if you can, if a response to that comes up along the way, feel free to respond. And then of course when we come to the end, we're gonna leave some time for folks to ask questions too. So I'm gonna throw in our next question, and then if anybody, even though I'm asking like the next question, feel free to respond, because I think it's all good stuff, right? And the questions are just to facilitate dialogue. But if anybody else has additional kind of construct or histories that feel important, please raise those. But the next question I have for folks is, we're in a global environment, and our socio-political climate has a huge implication for what we do and don't do, particularly in higher education and academia. What are the implications of legislation or even campus policy for this conversation, and how does that impact you in particular in your diversity work? And again, I think it kind of segues nicely. So we're still talking about historical context. We're still talking about those things. So happy to hear from anybody who wants to share out.
Dr. Berdine, I'll go ahead and kind of jump in. First, to address the question, I find that it does very well tie together. I think that it's very important to hold our leaders accountable, right? And so you talk about whose job it is to do this, what department, or, how can others, not be so decentralized, make it important in your space. And so you might not be able to change the whole university and the way things are structured, but you can have influence in the areas that you are in. And so, for example, I'm in the Career Center, and so when we look at the work that we mostly do, it does tie into diversity and inclusion. It very well can. Are we making sure that we are bringing in employers that are of diverse backgrounds? Are we making sure that that's important to their in their mission statements and the people that we represent and have on our campus? And so we've had some issues, in the past with people that we've brought in that have touched people and hurt people, honestly. And so we've had to make changes to who we bring in and who we're allowed to bring in, and then the type of programming that we do. So I think that when we look at the departments, I would say, take a look at what your structure of your office is and talk to your supervisor and let them know that it's important to you, because it might not be on their radar. It should, but it just very well might not be. And so holding our leaders accountable, being vocal. A part of a really good girl group and a good circle of friends here at UT Dallas, and someone said that they have been practicing internally speaking up and not holding those things in. So when they're seeing injustice or they're seeing things not structured, the correct way, or they have questions, asking those questions and being vocal about it. Because I think what happens is we get so uncomfortable with tough conversations. And so whatever feels safe for you, whatever feels comfortable for you, that's how I would say to approach it. But everyone on this call, if you're a part of a department, if you are, especially if you're a supervisor in a leadership role, you have the power to enact real change in your department. And so I would definitely start there. And from there, maybe you can encourage other spaces to do the same. I think for those folks who are doing this work, with the current climate, there's a lot of implications that can happen. And so I know we're going to get into the order, but the president has issued an order that, in my opinion, is very silencing of the work that a lot of D&I people are doing out there and the verbiage and the terminology that they use. And so that has huge implications on what we say, how we say it. We do get grant money, we do get federal funds, and so it has serious implications. And so I think it's a matter of, if it's, the way I see it, if it's on the president's level of the work that's being impacted, the words that are being used, and to more so much so that they created this order to, in my opinion, silence people, then there is change. It's happening. I can see it. But when these things come up, these barriers, you just have to keep pushing through. And so I'm really curious to see what UT Dallas will continue to do beyond the order, beyond people trying to stop and fight the process. But I think that if everyone is wanting to do this work, they have to realize that sometimes things are slow, sometimes they're fast. But if you keep steady to what is true and what you believe in, what is right for people, for equity, then that work never ends. It should be human nature. And for some people, unfortunately, it's just not.
I love what you shared specifically about kind of thinking about what you do, and even within a department, I think even looking directly, and I can post the link to the executive order for folks here in just a second, but that we can also be thinking about what we even do personally, right? We all have probably a way that we all send out email, right? What's your signature say about, you know, about equity work? Is there any way that you can kind of engage with people and respond to people in ways that humanizes them a little bit more? You know, how do you engage in conversations with your colleagues? How do you engage in direct conversations, thanks Cynthia, that we have with students? So I like that notion. Yes, there is this broad work, and certainly we have it at, you know, very executive and, you know, federal levels. And some of the implications for that, but then it's also, there's implications for us individually as well, in very, you know, what could feel like very, you know, simple practices, but in the same way that there are microaggressions, right? Like these very micro things that are happening, really thinking about, you know, the micro affirmations, right? And how that also is a part of the work, and that's equity work. So I like to tell people, and I know most people who know me I smile quite a bit, and I really do see this intervention, right? Like, if people can catch a smile and catch, you know, somebody really looking them in their eyes and being like, hey, how's it going? That means something, right? Because so oftentimes we're met with, you know, some hard things. So I just really appreciate that about what you're highlighting, Brianna. Anybody else thinking about like, you know, legislation or just, you know, the socio-political climate and the implications it has for the work that you're doing? Jacqueline?
Yeah, I think I really appreciate what Brianna has said, and so I would like to let that stand on its own about the executive order, and I'm just going to leave that one there. However, I do want to talk about like the like interpersonal implications, as you said. So what are some of the like emotional, sometimes for some people, physical implications of something like this, or other, as you said, microaggressions that people experience daily, sometimes hourly, throughout meetings or classrooms. And connecting it with what I heard from Brianna in it being something that we can all be charged with. So it not necessarily be, you know, I do think that there is a lot of strength in when your diversity and inclusion work is informed by thought leaders that, and as I really appreciate Poe's reference to Black feminists, because on essentially every front, there have been amazing work and strives made by Black feminists specifically. And so that's always a really great place for people to start when doing any kind of equity work, truly. When you're talking about disability justice, when you're talking about socioeconomic justice, when you're talking about really any of these factors, you can always start with a Black feminist. So as the gender equity practitioner, I had to put an additional plug for that. But when you've had that guidance, this literally could be woven into every piece of your job. Honestly, your job, your role as a student on campus. This can be, if you are a decision maker, which at some point of one's day, one makes maybe many decisions that have either, you know, smaller implications on like a smaller number of people, but there are even people on this call I know that have far-reaching implications for many people. And so based on those decisions, where whenever it comes to maybe hiring practices, so kind of more on a macro level to, as Kim said, like more on a micro level with your signature. You know, I kind of use my signature line as honestly as like a billboard because I want to put my pronouns there, but also I'm going to put a link to about pronoun usage, how incredibly important it is to normalize and all these things that may seem minor, but when you don't have them, what is that potentially communicating to someone? I did want to get to an amazing question in the chat that appears to to be from a student about what role students could play in it. And that is something that I really, really wanted to talk about, or at least just say something brief about, is students, I have noticed, sometimes feel really disempowered in a lot of situations. And one of my favorite things is to have discussions with students about all the different avenues that they can take. And so something I would strongly suggest to any student on this call and beyond, or who's engaging in this teaching right now, is to really get to know the different resources on campus, the different offices, and then also the different policies on campus. And there are, staff and faculty abound who would love to help you essentially learn more about that, so that you can affect change, or you can make change effectively. That's what I've seen. I've worked with quite a few students before. I'm thinking specifically about folks who have felt really passionate about menstrual equity work, which same. So I was like, I'm here for this. And they've done incredible research and all of that behind what are some of the things that they want for UTD's campus. How do they want to affect change? And then it's just been a true joy to help them navigate, kind of like our structure at UTD, to figure out how we can really open up access to menstrual products for people on campus. How can we do some education about how to utilize menstrual products? Because we're making an assumption sometimes that menstruators know how to utilize any given product that they might have access to. So just some of these more fundamental things. And I think that students, the student organizations on campus, also do amazing work. So when you can organize in that way together, you can then get almost like a staff faculty guide to help you through. Okay, y'all know this system. How do I navigate it to get what I need to have happen? I've seen the most effective change there. And then I have to put in a plug, which Dr. Berdine, I feel like you'll appreciate this plug for mental health reasons. What I've seen the most be the best practice, especially as a college student, is, and I'm going to say something specific about self-care, but is self-care while you're doing this process. Because if you're juggling your classes, maybe family responsibilities, maybe you have kiddos, you're, and then also a pandemic all at the same time, and you're trying to advocate for some of this change on campus. One of the best things that I heard from a mentor was, you could think about this as a race or a marathon even, but you're going to get tired and you're going to have to sit down, and it may feel that has a little bit more of a competitive feel. Instead, I like to use a choir metaphor, that we have a whole choir of people who will be singing this song, and whenever you need to take a breath, the song will go on. You take that breath. You take as long as you need to take that breath, because you've kind of built this coalition or choir around you to carry on the song. And so I just, if I could get anything across specifically to students or people who work with students, it would be that that piece to it, that this isn't necessarily all on your shoulders. It's so crucial to connect with others who are feeling passionate about some of the things that you feel passionate about, so that you can take your breath and the song will go on.
And that's that on that. Thank you so much, specifically for speaking directly to students. We're going to hear from Cynthia, and then I was just going to call the panelists to time. And I think we've gotten through 2 of the questions, and so we're not even halfway through. So I am going to kind of facilitate us moving through, because I think a lot of the questions that that are coming up for folks, we intend to talk about. So I'm going to move us through those a little bit with some intention, but it's feeling like it's good stuff to me. But you know how sometimes when you're in it, you're like, is this, or maybe there's other things. So I'm going to try to balance that out a little bit more. Cynthia, what you got for us?
Yeah, I feel like Jacqueline and I often find ourselves on the same wavelength, and kind of along the lines of, I think you shared a lot of the little more micro pieces of the day-to-day interactions for students. It just brought to mind for me some of the questions that came up also in the chat of the large picture scale Brianna was talking about. So I'm thinking about how it's a different department or a different unit. I just really want to encourage us to think about things like, what are the maybe like theories or missions that our departments operate under? And so I know UT Dallas has a strategic plan for diversity and inclusion. I know the Office of Diversity and Community Engagement has a very clear mission and strategy that we work for every day. But I love and I want to highlight A&H's work this summer, in that when you think about A&H, probably diversity and inclusion is probably not the first thing that comes to mind, but their ability to really pivot this summer and now really integrate diversity and inclusion into the very core of who they are by leading these teach-ins. And so I think oftentimes this work feels very like, well, it's for those groups, like it's for that department, but that there really is a tangible way in which each department can have its own perspective, mission, theory of whatever phrase, how you want to put it, of what does diversity, inclusion, and equity look like in your space. And that for students, that you can advocate for what that looks like. So if you are in engineering, that looks differently than what it'll look like in ATech to be diverse, inclusive, equitable. And that from that is kind of where you leave this legacy for the students that come later, these very specific ways in which you can kind of incorporate that into the work that you do. There's space for all of us.
I feel like this is good, y'all. I feel like I'm getting my life, so hopefully other people are. I'm gonna, again, I'm gonna ask another question, but feel free if there's still more from what's being shared, please share that out. And I'm gonna specifically look to Poe or Bruce to respond to these, and it's whomever, right? But I think it's been a while since we've heard from y'all. So much of the work that we do is in the spirit of a deep value on learning and teaching. And equity work is deeply personal and pulls up a number of emotional reactions for folks. And also when we're viewed as experts, some folks may not know that we also struggle at times. So curious for you all, what do we need to think about in our privileged identities, particularly when we might feel defensiveness, confusion, or threatened by diversity, equity, social justice work? And how do you all manage when traumatic or stress responses comes up around your marginalized identity? So what's the emotional work in it for you, and kind of what do people need to be thinking about in their privilege? What do you think about and hold in your marginalized identity when the stress and trauma might come up?
I'm gonna defer to Dr. Johnson while I process all that, because that's a lot.
It is. Leave it to the psychologist to be like, so let's talk about how you feel. And Jacqueline kind of set us up for that too, kind of speaking to the importance of self-care, but I wanted to just tap into our humanity in this, right? Because I think sometimes people can kind of view us in this way that can separate us from that or disconnect us. What you got, Poe?
That's a good question. I think that for me personally, I don't do a very good job of it, right? So what I do is I focus on the work, and perhaps to my own detriment. And there's oftentimes, you talk a lot, right, but particularly in the last 7 or 8 years, about this notion of self-care, making sure you like check in with yourself, making sure your emotions are or you're not being sort of triggered or like re-traumatizing yourself. But I think the kind of work that I do and the kind of work that everyone on this panel does doesn't always afford us, at least in my experience, doesn't always afford us the opportunity to really do that because we still have to do the work. So I think there's a sense in which we do it and then we sort of like, I shouldn't say for anyone else, I will pile on more work as a way to avoid having to deal with the kind of trauma that's going on in the background. So in some ways, I'm perhaps the wrong person to ask this question to because I don't have a good way of doing it. And I tell students and I tell people I mentor that I tell them the same things, like, practice self-care, make sure you check in with yourself. But if you're going to be serious about this, you should know that there is no guarantee of success. There's no certainty of success in this work. There's not even really, the odds aren't even in our favor, to be perfectly honest. We are probably going to fail in whatever goals that we have. So we have to sort of think beyond ourselves and like build structures and build relationships and build positions that will allow for other people to keep on when we can't do it anymore. Because there's a reason why people burn out of activist work, and there's a reason why people get burnt out on doing diversity work in institutions, because it's just so much. And we shouldn't I don't think we should lie to anyone to tell them that this is like work that if you take a vacation, do a staycation if you need to or something like that, it'll be okay. The reality is it probably won't be okay. I have not recovered from 2014, much less last week, right? So I can't tell anyone how to do better when I know that there's probably a timeline when I can't even foresee myself continuing to do this kind of work in the way that I do it currently, because there's too much at some point.
Thank you for sharing, brother. I think for me, I'm learning to, and like you, I'm a workaholic. I love what I do. I'm good at what I do, but ultimately you have to take a break. And so I've told myself, you cannot solve the world's problems. When I was a younger professional, I tried to do everything. Those that know me, I'm always working on something. So it's kind of hard to get a hold of me sometimes. Ultimately, you have to take care of yourself, because as that image, I think, who posted it earlier? Was it Jacqueline or Brianna? So you can't pour from an empty cup. This work requires you to keep refilling your cup. So you got to find those things in those moments where you take an honest reflection. Hey, have you done as much as you can? Okay, cool. Are you angry about it? Okay, that's fine. It's cool to be angry, but you can't stay there, because that stress will affect your body. And if your body's no good, everything else goes with it. And so to do this work, to run this marathon or be in the choir, as we're perfecting our voices, we have to take a break. Musical notes can be held, right? But at the same time, you got to breathe. So you got to take a step and breathe and take it all in and understand that, hey, you've done as much as you can. In those times where you can't do as much, you give yourself some grace. So Corona, this COVID-19 time, has caused me to really understand that some things are above my pay grade and some things are above my ability to solve it. But I've done as much as I can. I'm do as much as I can to do for that moment. Ultimately, as we're at an institution of higher education, it's about our students' benefit, right? They pay tuition to come here to learn, but also we help them grow with the extra curricular and outside the classroom activities. So cultural competence is one that I'm very passionate about, and leadership and diversity and inclusion, all those things come together. So if I can reach that one student today, I've done my job. I can say at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. or whenever the whistle blows, I've done what I need to do for today. Now I get to go do something for me. And so the work will always be there. A good mentor of mine has a quote, and in his quote, it pretty much says the work is never done with education. And so I live by this mantra personally. If I'm not learning, I'm dying. So I got to be learning something. Even when I go home and turn off this diversity work, I'm learning about my family. I'm learning about myself. I'm learning about the outside world and learning to empathize with myself and also others, because not everyone is at the same place in their cultural development. And so please understand that the work will never be done. People are born every day. People are learning new things every day. They're being exposed. They may not know that they were a supremacist or whatever the case may be. So there is work to be done. So please understand this work, it will continue to the end of time, because we're not born with the knowledge of each other. and understanding where people come from and their stories. So in this work, there are plenty of stories to be told. There are plenty of people to be highlighted. There are plenty of hearts and minds to be changed. And it's not going to be done in a day. So you have to take care of yourself. And you have to say, this is enough for today. I'm good. I've done as much as I can. We're not Superman. Superman didn't have to eat or sleep. But we learned throughout time, Superman had a heart. And he had to learn how to go recharge that heart and spend time with people that, matter to him. So that is what I'm going to say. I know I've been long-winded, but please take care of yourself, because if you're no good, the people around you, they can't benefit from the greatness that's in you and how you have to affect their environment. So.
And as a mental health professional, and I see a hand raised, and I sent a direct message to you. If you could check that and let me know, then I can follow up. But I think that it's also really important to, I think some of what you all are doing in the responses so far, just you're normalizing that this work is difficult, that we don't have the answers, that we need to take breaks. And I think that is just as much a part of the work as any, right? Rest is a part of the work. Taking that breath is a part of the work. Because at least for me, the work is rooted in humanity and humanizing all of us. And I think a part of humanizing all of us is, and I think I said this, last week on, in a space that many of you are probably in, but I think it's really important. What I try to remind myself in this equity work, particularly around my privileged identities, is that I really do not have to go beyond myself to do this work. So when I get, overwhelmed, or when I start thinking about like, oh, it'll probably be 3 generations before, we see the kind of liberation that I would want to see, then I recognize like, okay, when I feel like I'm coming up against, all of these systems, I recognize like there's work that I can do. Right? Like I can just like, who have I like, in what ways have I not, made resources accessible to folks, or in what ways am I potentially, engaging in harm, and I can, kind of do that work. And I think, and it's probably a broader conversation, but a lot of kind of this notion of like expertise and like what it means to be a teacher and what it means to be, the person on a panel, right? Is that we have it all, or that we don't, there's not mistakes, or that there's not work and labor in it for us every single day. And I think that that's a part of what we also have to dismantle, this notion of, kind of teacher as expert, all knowing. Because we're learning just as much in this space as anybody else is who's watching us, right? And so really wanting to just normalize the humanity in it for us too, right? And it's also still really important to hold ourselves accountable as much as we would any other, a larger system. I'm going to throw in our next question, and then I don't know if either Brianna or Jacqueline have any responses to the question around like, how do we navigate the emotional piece of it, particularly in our privileged identities? And since we've spent a little bit of time talking about like how do we cope around kind of the marginalization, while I pull up our next question. Jacqueline, are you?
Yeah. So I really appreciate that question in particular, because I think from what had been modeled to me previously had been mostly digging into the oppressed identities or marginalized identities that one holds. And so I was thinking about my identity as a woman, my identity as a Black woman. I had been thinking about my identities as a large-bodied Black woman. And what I realized is that I was missing out and withholding from myself a lot of amazing opportunities to think about who else is being left behind, because in this liberation project movement practice, it's not necessarily just about where I fall, it's who else is being left behind. And so who's even within the margins of the margins. And so I'm so grateful to people who have, who have gone outside of that previous practice of focusing in on some of those elements of marginalization and have broadened it, and really thinking about, well, what have I done as a non-disabled person for the disability community? What have I done for the trans community, especially when thinking about how a lot of the Black life that we've lost this year alone has been Black trans lives, Black trans women in particular. So while I may be a woman, I am a cisgender woman. And we have this whole community that has been systematically and routinely targeted and experienced violence at a rate that I would never know. So really wanting to do work on focusing in on those things. Just thinking about myself. Yes, I am a member. I identify as Black. I am a light-skinned Black person, so I may move through spaces in a much different way than someone who has darker skin than I do. Colorism is even within community, colorism is absolutely at play, and I know that I can navigate spaces in a different way than some of my darker-skinned siblings. And so, I can't emphasize enough that while balancing the self-care and trying to navigate coping strategies, which, just by the way, full transparency, because I believe in that, when talking about this work, my therapist has been incredible in helping me highlight some of the ways in which I was not coping well with some of my with some of my work and responsibilities and family life and juggling things. And so that has been crucial to, like, me as a person, for sure, but also in the way that I'm able to then fully give myself over to doing this work, and has given me the space to be able to say, you know what, let me put myself to task for a second. Who am I leaving out right now? Let me think about the ways in which I have created barriers that don't need to be there. And I think back to the concept of flexibility that we were referencing earlier in this conversation. Where am I being inflexible that it doesn't really make sense? And this is my last example. I'm so sorry. I'm talking a lot, but it just feels really crucial, because I've heard from so many people who are navigating these issues and challenges. Right now, we've referenced COVID-19 quite a few times throughout, because it is something that's affected all of our lives in many different ways. One way that I keep seeing possibility is in how we are framing professionalism, and how am I being inflexible with people, or how have I previously been inflexible with people with this notion of professionalism and what I expect from people? Am I expecting you to keep your camera on at all time because that is what's professional? I need to see your face. Do I need to see your face? Can I still perceive you to be competent and to be able to accomplish your tasks and things like that? Can I just trust you as a fellow human being? Is there a way that we can engage in the chat instead of doing things verbally or through email or however? Are there ways that we can just be, again, flexible, but also creative, and reimagine a way that we can interact with each other during this time, and hopefully beyond? Because what I have seen is this has not just opened up barriers for some of the more superficial things that you could kind of imagine this helping with. This isn't just like, I didn't want to do my hair today, and so I'm going to keep my camera off. This is for the person who is needing to breast or chest feed a child while still carrying on a conversation with somebody. Opens up access to parents. this opens up access to someone who's a member of the disability community, who is maybe navigating some chronic pain, and they would do best with their camera off. So just these like seemingly small things, I think can do so much to open up access. And I want to be vulnerable in this moment and say that this is work that I have charged myself with doing during this time, because again, I've tried to find my healthier coping tools with the help of my favorite mental health professionals, and then I can focus on who else am I leaving out. That has felt like the most powerful charge to me whatsoever. What are some things that I'm not thinking about because of the privileges that I have, that I've maybe neglected some communities, and change that, reverse that, be flexible enough to respond to that call. So again, as Dr. Berdine said, this is a practice and not necessarily ever perfection, but this is a part of my current practice, and it is not perfect, but this is what I've committed to.
Everything that you shared is so important, and if I may, and this is not me speaking for you, but maybe some of what I'm like projecting onto the point at which you apologize for sharing, in that way. I think one of the things that comes up for me and what you might be seeing, and what I imagine is what we're seeing, is for those of us who do this work and labor in the way that we do, we spend a lot of time, people come to us because we're perceived as safe folks, and we get so much information about strategies and things that we could do. And so when we have an opportunity, and when we trust that there are people who are in the space who might take what we say and do something with it, we get excited, and you're gonna hear from us because we're like, oh, and then there's this too. So I really invite that, and want to just kind of name that comes from, or at least for me, it comes from a place of having a wealth of resource from the many conversations, from the labor and all of that, and from the stories that are behind some of what you're sharing. And so I just appreciate you and all of us, as we're sharing out, because I know that there are humans on the other side of that, and there are lived experiences that we're hopefully, speaking to and giving voice to, and I know that people are going to do great things with the things that are going to be shared, or that are being shared. Jacqueline, what you were sharing is a nice, I think, segue, and so I'll throw this question out. We're in a moment and movement of viral exposure to pandemics and disparity that is centuries felt for folks with marginalized identity. And we've been gifted with some powerful call-in from our student body and faculty and staff. What is the future of diversity, equity, social justice work on our campus? And what are you looking forward to and hoping the movement will allow you to do now in your diversity work with this momentum?
I think it's really important to keep the momentum, yes, and appreciate those that have contributed to it. But I think it's even more so to now turn that momentum into policy, because policy is what is going to go beyond, right? And so in the tough conversations that I'm sure the students have had, that the Black faculty and staff have had, it's taking a look at what are all of these ideas and how can it be now institutionalized to where we don't have to have these same conversations in the future. I think that UT Dallas has a ways to get there, but I am hopeful that there are going to be some things that are just now woven into the UT Dallas fabric, and not to just say that, oh, we have this or oh, we have that, but that it is truly put in together in a way that it is just felt. It's not something that has to be stated. It's not something that has to be showcased or emailed to the entire UT Dallas community. It is just a way of being that we have set the tone for. And I think it's important for those in spaces and those in leadership roles to consult. And so whether you hire consultants outside of UT Dallas or you value the students and the staff that you have here and consult with them, you have to have students and staff in certain spaces. And so if that's, in cabinet meetings, if that's in policy change meetings, you have to have representation. And I think that is the issue, is that sometimes, again, you don't know what you don't know. And so you might assume that, oh, this is going to be a fine thing to implement, but you haven't asked, you haven't consulted, you don't have the right makeup of the people that you're consulting with. And so I think that where UT Dallas has to get to is to a place to where it's not, oh wow, I found another Black faculty here at UT Dallas. I've been here 3 years, and I've only had one Black professor. I've had none Black professors. It's just you see it, and it's there. That representation is there. It's on the leadership teams. It's just all throughout, and then from there, you're not having a one-sided kind of mindset. It is truly pushing towards equity. And I think, like I said, I think we have a little ways to get there, but I think it can be done, and I think that we need to rely on more research, reaching out to our aspirational schools and getting what are these things that are working for you. We have to do more research. And I think that sometimes us being a research institution, that we don't actually go out and do that research ourselves, which is really weird. But consult with these other universities that are doing good things and have seen it work. What is it that we're not doing that we could be doing? What is it that we can implement that we haven't implemented? And how can that just really push forward this change movement? And so I'm excited about it, but I am with Poe a little apprehensive. But I definitely think that we have some ways to go. So.
Yes, you're getting shout outs from Jacqueline, Brianna for the things that you're sharing, and Bruce, we'll go to you next. But I was thinking specifically about the ways that graduate students have such a unique role in the university, in that there's like you're a student, but then you're also faculty, but not quite. You don't have the power that comes with, that position. And I mean, and talk about in ways that I feel like, some real like plumbing kind of situation, positions to be in. I was really curious specifically, and I think someone else was curious, Poe, to hear your perspective, particularly as a person who's been a graduate student here, on this question specifically. Bruce, what do you have? And then we'll.
No, if you want Poe to go ahead, I can follow up. I mean, I'm going to echo some of the things Brianna talked about, but I have some other ideas too. So go ahead, Dr. Johnson.
So yeah, I'm gonna sort of reiterate some of my skepticism on the surface, right? And partly it's because as a graduate student, I tried to do some of this, right? And I didn't have institutional support necessarily. Well, I didn't necessarily know about resources that were sort of beyond me. So as a graduate student, I was trying to do a lot of it with other graduate students and somewhat on my own. So I would go to faculty, and in fact, I went to the dean of A&H at the time at one point, and we talked about it. And the response was, well, I would love to, but, right? It was always, I would love to, but. It was always something along the lines of, that would be great, except, right? There was always a reason. In fact, at one point during a meeting, I was told, well, we just can't get more Black faculty here because no one wants to come here. Or we don't offer the things that Black faculty are going to be interested in teaching, as if there's a kind of like, there's a box in which only Black people teach these kinds of things, and then that's it. And if you don't have those things, then there's nothing else. And I'm sort of reminded of the fact, and from a previous question, actually, of the sense that like A&H has sort of like been really involved in this. But I recall actually reading when they decided that they're going to start like a African studies minor or an African American studies minor. But if you actually look in those classes, and I've taken a few of those classes, and I also know people who have been in those classes, and those are not classes that you would find in the Black Studies minor. Like that's like the charge is ridiculous on the surface, right? Because none of them have what Black Studies, there's a motto and an ethos within Black Studies. It's not just, it has to be about Black people, right? Like that in itself shows that there's a real lack of understanding about the very notion of what Black Studies is. And it's insulting to someone who has been in a Black Studies department, who was taught in the Black Studies department, that those kinds of classes can be put off as like, oh, well, here's like the Harlem Renaissance. You're done, right? Get out of here. Take your Black Studies and leave, right? So no, like this is a deeper issue, and I think it's not just one that affects A&H, don't get me wrong. It's one that affects UTD as a whole, in which there simply isn't at least in my experience, and like I said, it's been several years since I've been there, but I don't think that I'm wrong to say that this is still the case, where there isn't a commitment to these issues because there's nobody who even knows what those issues are, right? They don't even know the questions to ask, much less how to give answers to those questions. So if what I'm thinking happens to the future is that this will sort of die down in 6 months, and there'll be like a couple of new Black faculty members in some programs in some departments, and then it'll mostly just go back to the way it was until this happens again, right? And then this will be like a sort of a gradual cycle. But if there's not a clear and determined commitment to how to really engage with these issues, I know that there was a task force that was started, and I don't want to sort of like demean any of the work, because I don't know the work that they did. It might have been really fantastic work, but I do know, like, having sort of been in like a different position of having to ask for more Black faculty members as someone who's trying to do work on race and being basically told like, whoops, sorry, maybe you went to the wrong place, like that kind of thing. It didn't seem 3 years ago that there was a commitment to this, and I don't know how like such a change would have happened in those last 3 years.
You ready? Okay. So, Poe, thank you for your honesty. What I will say is change is going to come. That's the only thing that's constant in life. And I think as long as our students require more of us as leaders, faculty, staff, administrators, it'll come. Will it come tomorrow? No. Being a former Black Graduate Student Association president, I definitely feel your pain. I know how that goes. Being an ERG president, you want change, you want it while you're there, you want it to happen, but we have to plant those seeds and we have to continue to water them. I think conversations like these are what help our LOV task force and other administrators, if I see some of them in the chat itself, they can learn and hear these different perspectives. Myself, I'm on a couple different committees around the different schools that are starting to work on this work. And I do see, to address Beatrice's question earlier, I think that a decentralized model will come. I think we just have to make sure, one, like Brianna says, we bring in the outside perspectives, we bring in a model that works for our university. Two, we give people some empathy and some time to process how they feel and what they know. At the end of the day, we don't have all the experts yet. I think they will come in time, but some of these radical changes is going to take time. Just like when we build a university at UTD, we got to dig a hole. We got to check the ground. We got to see exactly what's going on. And then to build that foundation, to build a strong house. Because we throw up a quick house, it's gonna fall when the storm comes. So it's gonna take some time. I'm like you. Sometimes we are skeptical about some of these things. It may seem like optics, but knowing some of the people and the students that are on the ground and having met with them, there's some good work being done. And some people are being challenged in their belief systems, their understanding of issues, and looking at the history. Because at the end of the day, we can't just go to this person and say, you're responsible for the history of the institution. No, it doesn't work like that. It's going to take some time and some understanding and some beliefs to solve that. Being personally, this is what I will speak on. Having been a student at UT Dallas, having seen the growth and change, having been there for a number of years, I'm just glad we can have the tough conversations, because ultimately some of these conversations were taboo. Some of these emails went unresponded to. Having talked to the students who asked for change and asked for these things, the fact that we can have a conversation like this in this time. Sorry, Siri's doing what she wants to do. But at the end of the day, I'm happy we can have this, to be honest with you all. And I've had my own issues at UT Dallas dealing with some people, but at the same time, now they have a better understanding. They understand more. Sometimes it takes these cataclysmic events and situations to cause change. But at the end of the day, I think great things are on the horizon for the institution. And here's what I'm going to say, last but not least, it's not a popular opinion, but for us to go that way, we're going to have to lose some things, or some things are not going to be as important. So please understand, with change, there come consequences and implications. So I'm not at liberty to speak and all that because I don't know what's going to happen at the university, but the budget is finite, right? Just like in our personal lives, the budget only goes so far. So as you push things up, some things come down. So I think we have to think about that and keep that in mind. And I'm done.
Paul?
I'd like to just respond very quickly. In part because this is part of what I was talking about before, right? Like part of what we do sometimes, and I get why, and this is not a knock on any work anyone is doing, is that we start to say things like, well, it'll take time, or, well, it's gonna happen, but we should also just be happy we're having this conversation. No, we should not be happy about having this conversation. This should be like the least, right? This is bottom of the barrels having this conversation, because this is just a conversation. This goes nowhere unless people actually do the work. And I acknowledge, right, I'm not gonna be the one to do it because I'm not there, but we can't sort of like be satisfied with just having a conversation. And once we start to do that, then it becomes really easy to pass tiny little tidbits. Like I said, like, oh, here's another person over here. Here's another person over there. Be happy with that. That's the thing that, like, that will be the appeasement. Like, oh, well, don't you remember? You got a Black faculty member 4 years ago. Because as someone mentioned in the chat, that when they were in, and I was in this class with this particular student, they had one Black faculty member in A&H. That person has since is gone, and there's simply one more, right? Like in terms of tenure track, that's it. But the whole one more was like, look what we're giving you. This was 7 years ago or 6 years ago. Look what we're giving you. Like that idea is exactly what is being hoped upon by someone, right? Someone wants that idea to be the thing that continues, because that's how nothing really ever changes, because we get happy with the tiny little like crumbs that we get.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I get it. I mean, they came across that way, but I'm thinking that until there's a system, because the other thing about this whole decentralized model, my question is, if we go to that, what holds that in, what holds that accountable? So there has to be some accountability, even if we spread out the work. Like, are you doing a good job? It's one thing to give you a job, but are you doing a good job? Are we doing a good job of being diverse, of breaking down the system? So that would be my next level of thinking, that what's going to be put in place to hold us accountable to keep these changes going. Because you're right, this is menial, this is bottom step, but the next steps, there has to be a plan. And so I like the fact we're talking about a plan. Whether or not we get the plan done, we will see.
I'm going to throw in our next question because I think we're actually responding to it, and I just want to kind of draw everyone in. And then Cynthia, I see your hand. So pardon me, what are some of the norms that we engage or maybe impose in the academy and higher education? And what do you think needs to shift in our culture broadly and specifically at UT Dallas based on your roles and interactions with students, colleagues, and administrators on campus? And I think we're talking about that, right? We're talking about, and I really appreciate kind of noting, like, there are different levels, right? And there is a bottom level of like, okay, humanity is listening to people, right, is a part of what people are engaging in right now, which is really important. And just listening can also be, potentially dangerous, right? Particularly if then that is going to be used as like, oh, look at this thing that I did. I attended this, kind of this training. So I appreciate everything that we're talking about. And one of our later questions is just thinking about, like, what are the caution? What do we need to be cautioned around in this work? And so I appreciate some of that is coming up in the conversation, because I think that's really important too, when you have a limitation on like scholarship, and I'll say expertise, even though it's important to be critically conscious about that, but some expertise. And I think you do need that, right? You need cultural studies anthropologists. You need those folks to really help, because otherwise you'll think you're doing a great thing, and it could be very damaging and violent. Cynthia, do you want to share?
Thank you. I feel like I just walked right into what was in my mind. I want to thank the panelists for the vulnerability that you're showing and sharing in this work, because that leads me to kind of allude to that question, is that I think oftentimes when it comes to this work, there's this idea that all the folks who do diversity, equity, and inclusion arrive to this work with the same plan in mind of how we're going to do this. Let me tell you right now, we don't. And even all of us here on this call, probably to a certain degree, have very different approaches of how we would do this work. And I think for folks who are just really engaging in diversity work, are kind of really in the early stages, early adopters of this, that is so crucial for folks to understand, is this idea that it's not a monolithic, even lived experience for many members of these communities, that everybody comes to this work very differently, and that all of that has value, from the person who is maybe hot and ready to just completely overthrow the system to folks that are not. And so I think what can sometimes be at risk in academia, particularly higher education, can be, well, what do the articles say? What do the scholars say? That sometimes silence the voices of the very people that like in our campus, could be staff, could be students who are like, well, it doesn't matter what the article says. I feel not like I'm included. I feel like I don't belong. And that those two things can really exist and mean just as much as what research or what data says. And so I think in this work, and particularly because it's so personal to people, and I think that's the next layer for all of us who do this work, is, yes, it's my job, and there's functions of it that I do, and I hope I do them well. It's also very much so personal and deeply my lived experience. And sometimes that those two coexist, and that there's value in that.
Thank you for that. I started, someone asked about the executive order, so I was reposting that again. But yes, talking about the different approaches, right, and not making assumptions. And I think that that's really important too, because when you have the calls to action, or you have the people who, again, have that urgency, it'll be really important for them to know, like, who you're asking, right? And what is their value? What's their lens, or what's their approach to diversity and equity and inclusion work, and making sure that's actually in line with what the students are sharing is needed, what your colleagues are saying is needed, because sometimes you could be missing the mark and then have people feeling further marginalized, because it's like, yeah, maybe you're doing a flavor of diversity work, but if that's what's not needed for the department, or what's needed for that classroom, or in our case, what's needed for the institution, based on the very people that are most vulnerable and marginalized, then yeah, I think sometimes we do run into issue. And I think that that's a part of what needs to shift. I think kind of going to the people, and really viewing the people as the experts, right? And I think that that's a huge culture shift, because oftentimes we're looking at, the executive, the president's cabinet, right, to be the people who, kind of lead in this area. And I think right now, and certainly has been evident in the last 5 to 6 or 7 years, that, there's some grassroots, or kind of a more kind of like going to the people and having the people lead, right? And I think right now we're seeing students lead this institution, which I think is a really powerful thing, and there's a lesson in that. But it's going to be a total culture shift, right? Because we won't necessarily be looking to the VPs to tell us what's next, right? We're listening to the students. So, any other thoughts? And I'm looking at the question.
I definitely think that students, they just have such a weight, and I just wish that they, some of them are understanding that more and more every day, but I feel there's some who still just don't understand the amount of weight and power that you have on this campus. Oftentimes we do make decisions without consulting students. We have whole advisory boards and teams, and a committee for this and a committee for that, a committee behind the committee. And oftentimes it does not include students. But I feel that they are the voice. They're paying for us to provide them a level of service. And so you have to consult with them. But I think it's also important to not put too much weight on them to where they can't be students. And so it's a healthy balance, asking if they're willing to share their experience, and if they're providing you a level of service or expertise or consultation, you're going to have to pay them for their service. And so letting them, including them, thinking about including them. We work at a school, a university, include the students. And so I just wish that students understand the amount of weight that they truly have, and how they could really influence some of the ways that we do things or think about the ways that we do things. And so, yeah.
We're also responding to this, and so I'll throw it out to what are some of I've referenced some of the cautionary tales from our diversity, equity, and inclusion work that you can share with the audience, and specifically, how can we carve in a critical consciousness even on our own work? I think Jacqueline has spoke to this, Poe has spoken to this, and Cynthia was talking about this as well. But what are the ways we have to, check ourselves in this work, I think, is a part of what we've been responding to, and curious if other people have anything else that they want to share out. And I think it kind of taps into this question that that was just posed around, kind of the injustice they used in inequality, but the injustice around the burden of diversity work oftentimes falling to the folks who are experiencing the very marginalization and oppression and violence that we are that we're addressing. So, Jacqueline?
Yeah, if I may just make some distinctions. So something that feels important to describe about what makes it work more in detail is if I am a student or even a staff or faculty member, because these issues happen within staff and faculty spaces as well. But if I'm experiencing an issue and I'm voicing that concern, that is I think kind of like a base level communication. I'm sharing this feedback with you, the end. So I wouldn't necessarily, that is a certain level of emotional labor, but not one that feels really unrealistic to expect of a fellow human being or hope for a fellow human being if they feel comfortable with you. What makes it work is when I've had many conversations, I myself have done this, have voiced a concern or provided feedback, then, be challenged, that I hear that that's an issue for you, but how many people on this campus really deal with that? So really making it like a numbers issue, whittling me or this person's issue down to a percentage, which is like really harmful to begin with, but making that be the case. Then if you are a student activist, or like, let's just make the differentiation that some students aren't trying to be activists. They're just trying to get their needs met. They wouldn't necessarily identify themselves in that way. So you just have this student who's like, okay, well, I still need to get this need met. Let me do some research. Then they go and do some research and go back and say, okay, well, I've seen at other institutions, this is what happens. And let me be very clear, this is something that absolutely happens. I've done some research, this is in violation of Title IX. I've done some research, this is in violation of our very own non-discrimination policy that exists. That happens. And so what I find to be the actual work is that students or staff or faculty members are doing the work of the people that should be charged with doing that work. If I'm supervising someone, I've supervised someone, it is on me to say, okay, this is a need. What else could be done about this? How could I be doing this differently? Let me see what other offices are doing so that I can get my staff members' needs met. that's my responsibility. But we're really displacing that level of responsibility, and it just feels not just unfortunate, but I think it maybe speaks at least a little bit to what I heard from Poe in that in the skepticism, because if you are constantly doing so much work that becomes repetitive based off of the life cycle of a student, because you were one student that was doing that, you know, the 4 years before that or 2 years before that, it was another student who was trying that. And really, you know, some folks may be just waiting for the students to leave, which is kind of problematic in itself. And so I guess I've gotten into a ranting space, and so I'm losing track a little bit, I'm gonna be honest. But I think that I saw a question pop up in the chat that feels, or I'm sorry, Kim, I don't want to jump ahead too much, but it feels.
I was gonna one of the things that I want us to do is pivot to the open. So let me
Okay.
before you respond to a question, let me just kind of open everyone to
Yes.
to that. I put in the chat a just a message that for the next 10-ish, maybe 7-ish minutes, we are going to open it up. And I know some really powerful questions have been thrown out, and we've attempted to kind of address those, but particularly if we missed one, please feel free to repost that. But just inviting people to post questions that we can respond to. Since I posted that, there was a question that came through. What's an example of a problem and the solution the panelists have encountered in their positions? How would you like for the resolution to have been a better end? Anyone feel called? Poe, are you? Oh, go ahead.
So I just wanted to like make a brief comment, because I don't necessarily know that I'm in a really excellent position to fully and authentically comment on that in particular. But something that felt really powerful for me was talking to an economics professor. Just felt really powerful to hear them say, because I was like, well, you know, it'd be really great to do all these things, and that it seems as if this work is valued and this and that. And their first and only question was, how much funding do you have? That was like the first and only question that they really had. And that just really opened up a door to my mind, especially, you know, we're navigating a capitalist society. And so really you can see values, that values of an organization or institution represented within its the lines of its budget, right? And so I think about Poe's calls for more Black faculty members, and really like faculty of color, so Latinx faculty. I would love to see more Latinx faculty. I would love to just see more women, more diversity of gender, frankly. But what kind of funding is being poured into the recruitment efforts? Just even how we're doing some of those things feel very telling. And so the moment I heard that, I couldn't really go back from seeing that.
And the importance of, I think, obviously, you know, I think that there's so much power in representation. And I think one of the things that's really necessary in academia is also diversity of perspective. So if you have representation that is perpetuating, or not perpetuating, because that's one piece of it, right? But also if you have maybe diverse representation in terms of identity, but then they're teaching the same classes and we aren't really, you know, new or diverse perspective and exposing students to that, then we aren't necessarily doing, we aren't really actually doing the equity work. There was another question that was posed about getting perspective around the Am I frozen? Okay. Getting perspective around the Living Our Values task force. I happened to sit on that. I'm happy to share perspective, but people were, I think the person referenced specifically to pose some of the points that you were raising around, like, is this, the people want to know, what are your thoughts on that? Is this lip service? Is this gaslighting? Is this, what is that for the institution now? So if anybody wants to respond to that and give your thoughts.
I guess I'll say something since part of this is based off of what I said. And I will also say, like, I can't speak to exactly the kind of work that's being done within the task force, right? What I can say, though, in terms of someone who still has a lot of people who I'm connected with who are at UTD, and someone who also sort of just had walked the hallways and sort of knows the culture, that if it feels like it's the same thing that's been sort of, it's just a repetition, it's like on a cycle, like we can sort of count this down to a loop. It hasn't felt to me from the outside as something that's actually a task force meant to change, is meant to be a task force that has been done before, or similar kind of task force that has been done before. Like, they did a survey like 5 years back about sort of these same issues too. Like, so from the outside, it felt like, okay, how is this different than what's already been attempted? And this is not to say the task force then or the task force now is coming at this in any kind of fraudulent way, simply that, is there even really like weight to it, right? Is there anything actually that can be accomplished? Or is it a task force, like, as anyone who's in academia there are task forces sometimes to look at a thing without any actual motivation to do anything, right? It's just, what would happen if we looked at it, right? Is it that kind of task force? Because it really does from the outside feel like that kind of task force.
I think one of the things that's really important is to kind of look at what was this group tasked with. And in terms of what this group was tasked with, to give people, context to, inform whatever your opinion, because I say whatever your perspective is around what it is accurate. Like, I believe you if you feel like this is gaslighting, or if you feel like, but it was, what we're charged with is giving, based on the students' recommendations, then giving President Benson further recommendations around what can actually be done. And so a lot of what the task force has done is reach out to responsible entities across campus to say, here's what's being asked. What would that look like? Where's your role in that? That's then going, those memos have gone to the president, and then the president is now in the process and has already been in the process of then issuing out expectations to those various departments around what to do. And so I think that I think in terms of what President Benson wanted from the task force, that's happening. I think one of the things that we've we probably haven't done enough, and by we, in terms of the folks who oversee or convene the task force, is just getting that information out, because it's going to these people, but the campus community is not. You wouldn't know that, right, until I just said it. And so communication, I think, certainly is lacking. And that's a part of the feedback that was given directly to President Benson on last week from students who continue to just call us in and hold us accountable in ways that I think are really meaningful. But I think, however you're feeling about it, I think that that's valid, and I'm glad that we're referencing that. There was a climate survey that was referenced, and thank you, Shiley, for putting that in the chat. I'm having a little bit of an issue with my scroll function, so I'm going to scroll back up because I know that there were a couple of questions that were asked, but I'm having to toggle through to a different screen. Other questions that people have or other responses or reactions to that?
Yeah, my thought is I definitely understand and see the optics part of it. But I believe that our students, if they continue to hold us accountable, it will help us in that piece because, as Jacqueline said, they have a lot of power and they don't know how much power. I think sometimes they don't understand really what they can do. As most of our major movements throughout history, college students, right? College age students who were ready to make change. So I think it begins with them, with us supporting them, working out these thought processes, and then us doing our, how do I want to say it, mental equity, sweat equity, doing our part to help develop them into the people that they're supposed to be, to continue to make this change. Because at the end of the day, all of us we need to get paid, right? And we have that fear, which shouldn't be there. Oh, well, I could lose my job for saying this or doing that, so on and so forth. But ultimately, if our leadership is who they say they are, and I believe them to be, they're going to give us a chance to state what we need to state and be able to say, okay, I hear what you're saying. I may not be able to do anything right now, but I can at least consider it. Could you check in with me? The best leaders do that later on to say, okay, yeah, I thought about what you said. Here's what we can do. Or if it's an absolute no, this is what it is and this is why. And so we can't always have our way, but we can at least have civil conversations and tough conversations about what we're doing, because ultimately, we all have a privilege to be here, right? It's not required, but at the same time, we can make change and we can be passionate about things and fight for what we believe in. So that's me. I know that's the moralistic view and thinking about it, but I think it goes back to our students holding us accountable to give them the experience we say we give them, period.
I think that with any movement, and just Dr. Berdine take, with any movement, you're going to have, or any action or task force or anything, you're going to have people who will use it for optics. You're going to have people who will use it to finally do that thing that they have been wanting to do for however long, and now they have this call to action, they have this, and then they'll be able to, kind of hold people to account. So I think all of it, that's why I say all of it, I think is valid, because there will be a person who will say, look what we're doing, look that we have this, LOV, and it'll serve that purpose for them. But I also think that I hope that folks are also able to use that momentum to strategize and to kind of find themselves in it, and do some of the work that I think is really important to just acknowledge that the work is always being done, has always been done. And these task force or these people, we jump in these roles, we're oftentimes doing it on the back of, or with the blood, sweat, and tears of the folks who have done it before us. And I know that is true for me, very, specifically in the Student Counseling Center and the work that I've been able to do. It's because people who are no longer here were doing this work, and then they created some fire, some energy that then allowed there to be room enough at the table that I currently sit in and at. So we're at time. There's been a couple of things that have been put out in the chat, and maybe Shai, I don't know if you were going to come in the rear and talk about those, but please consider. I think one of the things that is really important to name, and I don't know who said this, because I'm sure I'm quoting some amazing queer Black woman, but follow the money, right? In terms of if you want to see what the values are, and that's even for us too. And so if you have capacity and you have the resources and it's accessible to you, and you'd like to put some money where your motivation and where your values are, we are making an effort with the Teach-In Collective to do some of the work that Brianna spoke to around paying folks for their labor. And so we would love for you, if you have capacity, to donate to these initiatives so that we can sustain the work. And thank you so much to our amazing panelists. Please feel free to unmute yourselves and do the awkward clap that we probably won't be able to hear, but we could at least try to feel it. Thank you all so much for your time and for your labor and all the ways that you are making the campus safer and more accessible to folks, and for the ways that I hope that we're all holding ourselves accountable to the needs that have been addressed. And thank you. Yeah. Feel free to post chat and love in the chat. I always like seeing that at the end. Tell us what you're thinking, and also fill out the survey to tell us what you were thinking as well. And that'll go out in an email as well, I'm sure. But thank y'all so much for your time and your words and your labor.
Yes, and I wanted to thank everyone as well, and also just a special thank you to Dr. Berdine. Moderating a panel, as everyone here likely knows, is not easy work, and it takes incredible skill, incredible listening, and synthesizing and feedback, and you make it look easy, Dr. Berdine. Thank you so much for your skillful moderation, and to Brianna and Jacqueline and Poe and Bruce and Cynthia and everyone behind the scenes. Thank you so much for this conversation. And if you heard something today that inspired you and you want to get involved, please sign up for the Teach-In mailing list. Join our collective. Just come meet with us on Fridays and join our conversations, which have been really sustaining, life-sustaining throughout this semester. So to liberation work. May we do it, may we benefit from it, may we bring other people into it. Thank you, everyone, so much for today. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, y'all. Y'all have a great weekend.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It's so good to meet you, Poe, and share space. And thank you for the truth telling. I love it.
Thank you for your Afro-pessimism, Dr. Johnson. On the page, in the heart, everywhere.
It was so nice to meet you, Poe.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that, man.
Thank you.
Appreciate the challenge.
Yes, we really do. Thank you for calling out A&H, and may we provide a better experience in the future. Maybe we live up to the demand, to the place he should have gotten. And, you know, Poe didn't say all this, but, you know, Poe worked on his dissertation, which was amazing. And I posted some of his scholarship that came out of his dissertation, you know, on race and media and racial violence and racial epistemologies with 3 white women, you know, and it was a conversation we had often, which was just like, this feels wrong, but let's do it, you know, let me be here for this, and reminding ourselves of how challenging that was, and what a scholar, you know, you've become, Poe. So thank you for your work.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for being in Texas for it too. You're not so
No.
You tried to get away, but Austin pulled you back.
All right, y'all, I have a 2 o'clock that I am now a few minutes late for. Just thank you all so much. And shout out to the people who are still with us,
yes,
listening and just not
everyone.
wanting to pull away. I feel the same way, Mary Jo and Andrew. Yes, don't want to pull away.
All right, I'll stop the recording at least.